I know some people who, when they read a book, every time they'll go to the very end of the book and they'll go to the last chapter and they'll read that last chapter before then going back to the beginning and reading the rest of the book. Anyone here who does that? Sonny, that's you? You're going to the end and reading it? Because I get it, right? Like, it's nice to kind of know what's going to happen, and then you get to see how the story unfolds and how you get to that point, you get to the ending, right? And we do this a lot with, any story, right, from the real world, movies and books. Like, we know what happens at the end most of the time, but we still want to know the journey of getting there. So I get it. It's not me. I don't do that with books. I like to, go through the book. I like the suspense. I like figuring out at the end how everything comes together. But I get it. It's kind of what we have here in Revelation for us this morning. God gives us this picture, the final chapter of life, you might say. What's in store for those who put their faith in Jesus? God says, here, look, this is what's waiting for you. And fitting for us today, on All Saints' Day, to look at heaven, look at what those who have already fallen asleep in Christ are enjoying and experiencing. Look at what God has in store for us. I get it. Revelation can be a little bit scary, maybe. A little daunting to dive into. There's a lot of symbolism, a lot of apocalyptic literature or language that is part of the book of Revelation. And I think sometimes that can cause us to be like, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I'm gonna leave that at the end, and I'm not gonna worry about that because I don't want to get myself confused. It's a shame though if we do that, because Revelation is filled with beautiful language, with beautiful promises from God to us. Yes, you have to sift through some deep stuff, some symbolism, some language that might be difficult to understand, but God has given it to us for a reason. And to really understand Revelation and what it's saying to us, what its purpose is, we have to understand the context in which it was written. The Apostle John was the author of Revelation. So the same author of the Gospel and the few letters. We have 3 letters from John to congregations that are part of the New Testament as well. And when John wrote this letter, he was in exile. He was on the island of Patmos, is what it was called, tiny little island. The emperor from Rome had exiled him to this island for preaching the gospel. And at this point, he was the only apostle who was still alive because, we read that list of all those ways that people died in our second reading from Hebrews, and all of the other apostles had met fates similar to that. All of them had been put to death for preaching the gospel. And it shouldn't surprise us that if the apostles were being persecuted, well, the church as a whole was being persecuted too. Christians were being killed. Christians were being ripped away from their families, imprisoned, sent off to work in slave fields and all the worst things that you can imagine. Yet despite all of the persecution, the Christian church was still growing. And so God gave this vision to John. That's what Revelation is, really. It's a bunch of visions that John got from God with the purpose of giving comfort and hope and strength to Christians who were being persecuted in the world. The main message was this: yes, you're facing persecution right now, but the church will prevail, you will prevail, and you have heaven waiting for you at the end of it all. The verses right before this, the end of chapter 20, they talk about what happens to people who don't put their faith in Jesus, and it's brutal. It talks about the lake of fire in great detail, and that's where the devil and his evil angels are going to go, that's where the people who persecute the church are going to go, and so there's that sense. But now the verses for us are for the extreme comfort of the believer, that we might know what's in store for us. We might not face the persecution that those Christians did. I should speak for myself only, but I've never been, no one's ever tried to kill me for believing in Jesus. I don't think they've tried to kill you either, but we still face persecution. Life is still a struggle, right? I hear people say that all the time, right? The struggle is real. I see it posted on Facebook. I hear people say it to me. I say, hey, how's it going? And they say, oh, it's a struggle. That's life, right? Life is a struggle. And as we look at verse 4 here and we see all of the things that God says he's going to take away that aren't going to be part of heaven, well, we realize he has to take them away because they still exist right now. Right? We see the tears of the mother whose son has ruined his life because of addiction. We see the pain etched across the faces of people living in war-torn countries, people whose families have been separated, people who have lost loved ones because of it. We suffer persecution, no one trying to kill us, but people who mock us, people who belittle us because of the things that we hold to, because of the things that we care about most. We've all been to the funeral, right? With the mourning taking place because someone has left this life. And we look at all of these things and at the world and the natural disasters that take place, and we realize this world is broken. This world is fallen. This world is a struggle. And all of that is capped up in death. Because God didn't intend for us to die. It's not natural. People will say it, right? The only thing that you can't avoid in life is death and taxes. They make it seem like it's this normal thing, but it's not. Death is not normal. God did not create you to die. But because we are all infected by sin, and because this world is infected by sin, now it's a reality for every single one of us. The ultimate consequence of sin is death. So yes, life is a struggle every day as we go through it. And if it's a struggle for you, which I think we just established that it is, well then these verses from Revelation chapter 21, this vision that was given to John, it's for you, for your comfort as you go through the struggle of this life. He starts off, he says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." I don't want to spend a ton of time theorizing and dealing in hypotheticals of what heaven is going to be like, because at the end of the day, we just don't have all the answers. But I do think that this verse necessitates at least a little bit of it to kind of help us understand what John is seeing here. First thing, that word heaven, the word that's used there, it can mean either heaven like we think of it, like eternal dwelling place, or it can mean just regular sky, right? You look out at the heavens we talk about. It seems pretty obvious here that that's what this is talking about. So new sky, new earth. We know that this earth isn't going to last forever. It has an expiration date. We don't know when it is, but we know that it's coming. And so God is going to create a new heaven and a new earth. And the big question here is what is that going to look like? What is it going to be? Respected theologians have been on both sides of this discussion. Some will say, well, God is going to completely destroy this earth, and then he's going to create out of nothing a new heaven, right? A new earth, the place that will live forever. Other people say, well, he's going to destroy this earth, and then he's going to use the leftovers, kind of the form, to create this new heaven and new earth. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter that much. That's not the thing that matters here. The point is that this old earth that is infected by sin will be gone, and there will be a new place where we will dwell for eternity that's not going to have any of the issues that this world has. Keeps going. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. This one, too, probably a little bit confusing on the surface, right? We have to dig into it a little bit. What's the new Jerusalem? What is this new holy city? Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians that the new Jerusalem are the believers who have fallen asleep in Jesus, the ones that God is going to bring with him on the last day to this new paradise that he's going to create for us. That's the people that you love who have fallen asleep in Jesus. That's you. Unless if Jesus comes back first, you will be this bride of Jesus, coming down to the new Jerusalem, coming down to the new heaven and the new earth. But I think the thing that's most important here to focus on is not what that is going to look like or what that's going to be, but look at what it is that gains them admission into heaven. It's what they're wearing. They're beautifully dressed as the bride of Christ. Earlier in Revelation, John talks about the people who have come out of earth to heaven as those who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And here in John's Revelation, it's the same thing. The people who are in heaven are those who have washed their robes in the blood of Jesus, those who have put their faith in his sacrifice for their sin. It's not those who have worked the hardest. It's not those who have even believed the hardest. It's those who hold on to that sacrifice through faith. It's those who have put on Christ's robes of righteousness, those who have put on the garments of salvation. That's what it's all about. That's what you have done. You have washed your robes in the blood of the Lamb. Through faith in Jesus, you have been made clean. Through faith in Jesus, you've been made an heir of heaven, one who is looking forward to the day when all of the things that John is talking about here in Revelation 21 are going to take place. It's you. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God." Here we have an Old Testament connection. That word for dwelling place, literally means tent. And so you could read it, God will tent among the people, and he will make his tent among them. During the Old Testament, they had what was called the tabernacle. It was God's house, the place of worship, while the Israelites were wandering through the desert for 40 years. And in that tent, or at that tent, God made his presence known visibly among the Israelite people. Sometimes during the day, he would be a pillar of cloud that would fill up the tent. At night, he would be a pillar of fire, and all of the Israelites anywhere in the camp could look to the tabernacle and say, "Look, there's God. His presence is among us." I think sometimes in this life, it's easy to feel like God has abandoned us, like we don't have him around us anymore, like his presence has gone. But here we have the promise that God is making his presence with us again, that in heaven he will be among us. His home will be with us. We will walk with him and talk with him. We'll see him face to face. It'll be like the Garden of Eden again, as garden with God and talked with him freely. So is the relationship that we'll have with our God in heaven. That's the beauty of heaven, this face-to-face connection with God that right now we don't get to experience. He will be among us, and he will be our God. What a beautiful thing to look forward to. Verse 4 says, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Everything that makes this life a struggle will be gone. Nothing will remain anymore that brings us any pain or grief or heartache. Loneliness will no longer be a thing. Sadness will be driven away. Anxiety and depression, they won't be a thing in the new heaven and the new earth, because God is taking those things away. And most importantly, death will no longer exist. We will no longer mourn the death of a loved one. We will no longer know that things have an end, because God is taking them away. The old order of things will have passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. This verse really gives us the task of the church, or at least it informs us about the task of the church. And when I say church, I don't mean building, right? I'm talking about the body of believers, those who believe in Jesus. They are the church. You are the church. The task of the church is not to try and set up a perfect social order. Don't get me wrong. We should help the poor and the needy. We should strive to be good citizens in this land that God has given to us. But the task of the church at the end of the day is not to try and set up a perfect social order here, because it won't ever happen. We're part of the old order of things right now, the things that are going away. We live in a world that is infected by sin, and if we think we're going to reach perfection here, we're deeply mistaken. God says, I am making all things new. So rather than trying to establish a perfect social order, let's do what God is telling John to do, right? He says, write this down, because these words are trustworthy and true. John, these words, these visions that you're seeing, they're not just for your eyes and ears alone, but they are for everyone. And so God says to us, you're seeing it. You see the vision because John has told you, but they're not for your eyes and your ears alone either. Take the things that are written, these true and trustworthy words, and share them with others. Proclaim the gospel truths that are contained within the Bible, the words of Jesus that create faith, the words of Jesus that give life, so that heaven might have as many people as possible in it. I can't wait until heaven when I'm walking around and I get to talk to people and someone says, yeah, actually, I learned about Jesus from you. What an awesome thing that God is using us to be a part of that. Or walking through heaven and someone says, yeah, actually the first place I heard about Jesus was at Christ Our Refuge. And you were long gone. You had died years ago, but there was a new pastor, and there were new members. And they told me about Jesus, and I learned about him there at your church. The things that we're doing here, they have eternal implications. Sometimes we just have to open up our minds a little bit and think about that, what it is that we're doing, the task that God has given to us. He says, don't let anyone go without hearing my words. It's going to be an awesome day when we get to talk to those people in heaven and hear the stories of how people came to faith through the sharing of the gospel. Last verse, he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life." Jesus says, this is all finished. I've done it. My death, my resurrection, they've accomplished this. Everything that I'm telling you, everything that I'm showing you, it's as good as done. For you who put your faith in Jesus, heaven is yours already. We only get little glimpses of it right now, but one day we'll see it in full. Until then, Jesus continues to preserve his church and to preserve you and me as believers in him as he continues to give us the spring of the water of life. His very words that create faith and create life within us. That intro that I used, talking about the final chapter, right, doesn't really work at the end of the day. Because this isn't talking about the final chapter of your life. Really, it's the beginning. The first chapter of your eternity. And as we think about eternity on a timeline, which you can't do because it's impossible, but let's say your birth is over there by the wall, right, and eternity just keeps going forever. This chapter, this vision of Revelation, everything that you're going to experience in heaven, it's way over there. It's at the beginning. Because even though we're right now in time, very soon we won't be. And all of a sudden, the time that we spent on this earth will be nothing but a distant memory as we continue to enjoy the promises that God has for us in heaven day after day and year after year forever. So as you continue to struggle through this life, as you experience grief and pain and heartache and loss, remember Revelation 21. Remember this vision that God gives to you for your comfort, for your benefit, where he tells you, this is yours. This is waiting for you. No more pain. No more sorrow. No more death. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait to be there with you. Amen.